the two of you have launched innovative, interesting companies. And so Ed, let's start with you. Tell us about Klaris Ip and the market that you're addressing and the kind of the business model that you guys have adopted there at Klaris Ip.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I started Klaris Ip to service the content business. So it might be a media and entertainment company or a publishing company, but it might also be just really any advertiser, a company that creates photography or video, television content for advertising. And what I do is get involved with the acquisition of content and the use of content by those companies. And in really every case, there's a situation where when you've acquired a photograph or a clip or a piece of music, you got to pay somebody. And in some cases, for some companies, those somebodies end up being like 2,000 people a month. And so my company provides two types of services. One is consulting services, where we help people figure out better ways to do things. But primary reason why I'm here, I think, is that we also provide like managed services. So we take care of the content supply chain for people on their behalf and payments on their behalf. So we're kind of like a managed service, a business process outsource service for the content business.
All right. Jonathan, you were one of the founders of Touch of Modern. Tell us about that launch and that journey that you've had and what's unique about Touch of Modern.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so Touch of Modern is an e-commerce company that sells kind of exciting, interesting, unexpected products, mainly catered towards guys. The whole premise was, at that time, most e-commerce companies were catered towards women, and we believe that guys like to shop as well. But we just like kind of cool stuff. And so with that premise, we launched a retail company and we're sourcing kind of merchandise all over the world because there's a lot of great, interesting products that come up, but you may not see in your everyday store because they're just small little boutique designers from around the world. And so with that, we were taking a very international approach from the very beginning, working with vendors from around the world, and therefore also had to do business and pay with vendors from around the world. And our premise was we wanted to make it as easy for them to work with us because they were, in a lot of cases, just getting started themselves and we were getting started. So to give both parties confidence that we're not going bankrupt is we wanted to give them a lot of confidence that we would be able to pay them by any method, by any currency possible.
Okay. So Ed, can you tell us a little bit about, let's talk about one of your big clients and the importance of the folks that they need to pay. Like, how important are the creatives out there that are creating content that your clients like and want to use? The importance of that in the ecosystem of your business and then your client.
Okay, so for example, one of our large clients is National Geographic. They, as you probably know, have their magazines. They also have a bunch of books, children's and adult books. They have National Geographic Channel, merchandise, trips and journeys. Their business is in the content creation business, but really they couldn't do what they do without collaborating with some of the best creatives in the world. And by nature of their business, they're drawing from creatives from every place, from the depths of Africa to the Czech Republic, to the United States, really all over the world, and using different currencies and different payment mechanisms for each one of them. So this client, Nat Geo, has thousands of people who they work with, and they've outsourced the whole process of clearing rights, of getting permission, and negotiating how much those people need to be paid at any given time. And so my company takes care of that for them. And as a result, we're tasked with the job of maintaining those good relations. And we need to represent our client in a way that's going to keep those creatives happy, paid, and producing the kind of work that that company, that Nat Geo, has come to expect, so that all the readers and watchers of Nat Geo content will continue to get great stuff.
And Jonathan, with Touch of Modern, launched as kind of with a global intent to bring to market interesting items. Tell us about the importance of those vendors around the world to your business, and how, give us a sense of how you approach that process of working with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for all retailers, the bread and butter of what distinguishes each one is related to its merchandise. So our vendors became extremely important to us because their products and their merchandise is really what drove our growth, because we were marketing their products as we scaled, right? The more interesting, more innovative, more unique their products were, almost the faster we were able to grow, because we actually rode with our vendors and actually helped build their businesses as well. And so our vendor relationships have always been extremely important to us. So we wanted to make sure to give them the confidence that we were growing with them, but we would be extremely easy to work with them. Because in our space, we've seen a lot of companies, especially in kind of the flash sales arena, die very quickly because either their businesses were running into challenges or they just didn't treat their vendors that well. And so that was something that we prioritized very early on. And it also allowed us in the long term to build a much more unique relationship with our businesses than most other retailers. So most traditional retailers will find their vendors, source the merchandise, order their goods in advance, and take on that inventory risk. But over time, as we've built such good relations with our vendors, we've changed the model where we actually, for the most part, don't buy any inventory, but our vendors trust us so much, trust us that we're going to be there and they're always going to get paid, that we actually will consign all their goods and warehouse it in our warehouse, and they just send it from around the world. And as we sell their goods, we'll just pay them every week, every month, because we have that flexibility, and we never have to really rely on that constant communication of how much we're selling, how much they need to invoice us. So it really just gives us that flexibility and makes it very easy to work with them.
Interesting. Okay, so at what point, Ed, did you realize, wow, this payment process is, when did that start to become a challenge for you? Or did you kind of see that would be challenging and launch with in mind having a technology to help you there?
No, actually, when we first were asked to do this work, it was largely a rights and clearances job, where we would just negotiate the deal. You could have my photograph for a period of time in a certain geographic location, and that's it. And then we would send that contract back to the company. I'll continue to talk about National Geographic because it's just a good example. We would send the invoice back, and then they would get paid through the vendor payment that National Geographic, which is also owned by Fox, by 21st Century Fox, uses for all their vendors. And the process that we found was happening was that when we sent them some obligations to pay, it was taking upwards of 90 to 100 days to get people paid. And so my staff, who had the relationship and had negotiated the deal, was hearing from the creative saying, we're not going to keep licensing you stuff for relatively small amounts of money and have to wait upwards of 100 days to get paid. And not just that, but we've got to go through this rigorous onboarding process in a system that's really fit for people who are going to be paid, thousands and thousands of dollars in a given clip, when I'm going to get paid a relatively small number of dollars. So it became sort of a crisis point where we were just inundated with complaints, and my team was worried about keeping these vendors happy. And the other component was that we were hearing from National Geographic that they were paying really high fees. ACH, wire fees to different countries. They didn't have any ability to negotiate rates, that they didn't have any visibility into the competitive set. So what we did was an analysis. We looked at what it would take to take on the payments on their behalf and to pay through a platform, which we ended up choosing Tipalti, but we did an evaluation of the various platforms. And we realized that what it would take would be speed and efficiency to get people paid, quicker and a more efficient onboarding, which was key, and reasonable prices for payments. Because an ACH or a wire fee can be like $30 to $34 in a given country, and that's just a very high number. So you want to get a payment platform that's negotiated or has rates that are competitive, so you can bring down your overall spend. So with that evaluation, we also looked at things like, amount of manual entry, what kind of reporting, what the relationship was from invoice to payment, 1099 support, W9, W8 support. And with that procurement process that we went through, we ended up selecting Tipalti for most all of those reasons. And so what we've achieved is all those things. Primarily, we went from 90 to 100 days to be able to pay people in 2 weeks. We've been able to reduce the onboarding process of submitting your tax information, et cetera, from a rigorous and timely process to being a straightforward process, but that is compliant. We've been able to reduce the overall cost of payments in terms of the bank fees. And so the net to our client has been a reduction in costs and a much faster delivery of payments, which has really just changed the whole dynamic with the content providers and made Nat Geo just, they're struggling to find other ways to give us more payments because they know that their payment mechanism internally through their ERP system is just very, very clunky.
All right, Jonathan, so you were Chief Operating Officer as well as a co-founder, so you had to dive into the world of infrastructure, the payment workflows. At what point were you saying, oh gosh, this is, we need to scale easily, and it's hard to do?
Yeah, so Touch of Modern grew very quickly, and we also didn't have a lot of money to really hire staff. So for the most part, everything that we didn't consider like critical towards the growth of the business, I did myself. And so as you can imagine, I guess one thing to explain for our business is every day we launch new vendors. So every single day we're adding 5 to 10 new vendors that were brand new that we also therefore had to onboard and pay. And so it became a very big headache for me very early on because I also took a philosophy where I wanted to know where every dollar was going out for the company. So therefore, the only person that could actually issue payments was myself. So because of that, we did a very quick search or active search looking for a technology solution that really had what we had in mind, which we were kind of conceptualizing, which was a way we could use our platform, which already knew how much sales we generated and how much we owed to our vendors, that our platform could also actually handle all the payments. So no human would ever need to touch it, and therefore we minimized the risk of any human error. And we looked around across all the providers, and for us, it was very important for us that we could pay in every currency, which at the time not a lot of providers could do, but also could integrate completely with our technology platform such that it looked as if our company was sending the payments and it was sent completely automatically. And so we talked to a few providers, ended up as a recommendation from one of our investors to Tipalti because they really fit the bill. And I think that partially comes from their international background that they took a much more global approach towards business. And so what we were able to accomplish with that was for every vendor that we work with, adding, at this point, we work with about 10 to 30 new vendors every day. They get automated emails explaining how we do business with them, and they get onboarded right away to our payments platform. And then after we complete a sale and sell their products, then the payments automatically get initiated based on what we've sold from our platform. So for the most part, we never have to have any human ever touch that process. And it allows us, even to this day, we've grown to a decent size, about 150, 170 staff, but we haven't added pretty much anyone to the finance team other than our controller that oversees our monthly closes and one person to help with the reconciliations.
Wow, that's scaling from 6 million to 150 million without adding an AP.
Yes, and to this day, so I recently left the company, and so our controller is the only one that has the ability to send out all payments for everything the company does business with. So we still keep our cash controls very, very tight.
All right, so we talked a lot about onboarding. That seems to be kind of a core workflow step, especially with a bigger enterprise like Nat Geo and then even up to Fox. Let's talk about the importance of that and how that's gone for you now that you've kind of modernized that. And you guys have an interesting situation where you also have, we call it transient payees, or folks that pop up that will need to get paid, and then that may be the only time. So tell us just about the onboarding process and then how that even works for kind of this idea of transient payees where they're not constantly being paid.
Well, once onboarded on the Tipalti system, you're onboarded as long as your information doesn't change. We do have periodic vendors, so you're not getting a monthly check or even a weekly check. You're getting a check whenever you actually sell a piece of content to the company. There were certain things that we didn't think about to start with, which are material. One is that when you onboard someone, you pay them, you ultimately have to issue them. They give you their W-9 or W-8, and then you have to issue them their 1099. And so that process of making sure that they get their 1099 and pay their taxes, or you at least tell them what they've been paid for the given year, is a really important component of setup, one that I really recommend that is paid attention to. And Tipalti's doing a lot to improve that process of integration with, QuickBooks has a great 1099 tool. There's all the other bigger enterprises use their own ERPs. So figuring out not just onboarding, but also 1099ing is a key component. As a general rule, it's a very easy process with Tipalti. There's been a couple of other learnings that we've had. One is that when someone's going to get paid, a department at the company is going to have to have responsibility for that payment. So if you're working with a big enterprise and there's multiple departments, in the case of Nat Geo, there's magazines and books and channel, each one has different P&Ls. You've got to be able to direct that payment back to them. So Tipalti has a pretty good mechanism of having coding that can be put into a report and then sent back to the division that will be ultimately responsible for the payment. But that, again, is a really important component of the workflow that you set up and how you utilize the system to make that workflow as easy as possible.
Jonathan, talk about onboarding vendors all around the world, how important that was to get right, and do you have any anecdotal stories around some of the pains around that you experienced as well, and then how you kind of modernize that?
Yeah, so before using Tipalti, as I said, everything was done manually. I processed everything myself. So obviously the biggest risk there is you can clearly enter a payment wrong, or most commonly you would enter something wrong with their bank account, either their name, or particularly for international vendors, you're missing some digits, or you don't understand how their banking account structures worked. And that would cause payments to get lost fairly frequently. And when you lose a payment in the financial structure internationally, it takes weeks or months to get back to you, and everyone is very upset. And so when we moved to Tipalti, the best thing there was you could have a very clean solution to have an online way for your vendors to onboard. It was completely white labeled, so under our brand. So now we were able to push back essentially adding their payment information back to the vendors, who were all very happy to do it because at the end of the day, it would result in them getting paid and getting paid very promptly. So everyone was very happy to enter their information. And if they entered it incorrectly, the best thing was they would take responsibility for the payment getting lost. So they wouldn't blame us for the week's delay if the payment had to bounce back and get reissued with the new account information. And then obviously when we were getting started, we had no idea we needed to collect W-9s or any of the tax compliance. So their portal handled everything completely automatically. So we were able to issue all of our tax records, as well as handling all international anti-money laundering and any of those activities there. So, moving towards more of a digital online onboarding just really helped simplify our process for our vendors. And then they really appreciate it too, because it just gives them a little bit more confidence that since everything is automated, they don't have to worry about getting paid because there's actually no human that could cause a delay there.
I'll just add one last thing on this. There is a lot of the Tipalti platform is a self-serve platform, so that those who are getting paid can log in and find out, what's due to them and what payments have been made. There's a bit, again, like in terms of thinking about workflow, some people don't do that. They want to just know when they receive a payment exactly what it was for. And so being able to set up a system where the payment is for a specific thing is really important, because like any given vendor might have had 10 or 12 things that they should be paid for, but they're only getting paid for one, and they need to know what that one thing is being paid for. And different payment structures, like a wire can include certain information, an ACH, other information, and a physical check, very little information about what's being paid for, but people oftentimes like checks more than you would expect. So there's that to think about when you're setting up a platform like this.
You really have touched on it, but outside of just the actual getting payments, Jonathan, we'll start with you. What other things do you try and do to make a good relationship with your supply chain, with your vendors out there? You touched on it, just having like a way to always know what you're getting paid for, how, and having like a history of that. But what other things were you considering just to build a good relationship with the vendors that you were working with, outside of just getting a payment?
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, we think of our vendors as clearly very long-term partners. And so for us, it's actually been kind of fun to watch that in a lot of cases, we're the ones that have helped a lot of our vendors, a lot of our designers really build their entire business, because we were we're normally, in a lot of cases, the first retailer to discover them. And then from then, they get picked up from other retailers and get broader distribution and kind of general growth. But at the end of the day, they still remember us, they still support us because we were the first people to work with them. And both making it easy to work with them and to continue to help them launch new products and kind of showcase their brand to our consumers is something that we just always like to do for our vendors.
Ed, have you heard from National Geographic? You mentioned they're looking for other ways that they can send payments with you guys because it's working so well. Is that because they're building better relationships out there right now with the world of creatives because of the work that you've done for them?
Well, it's a non-core skill. They don't particularly like it. They're a subsidiary of a larger company, which is Fox, which has sort of its own kind of ways of paying people. And we're finding with both them and with others that to outsource something like payments and get results like we've gotten, the kinds of change in relationship, literally transformative, is very convincing. And we're doing it at a rate that is ultimately reducing their overall payments fees because Tipalti actually has good numbers in terms of that, and very efficiently. So yes, there's a greater desire to send more payments through this system than through a more legacy-based, internally managed system that doesn't have the leverage with the with the bank relationship, doesn't have the ability to process quickly, doesn't have the reporting that this platform has. So there's just a lot of upside very quickly and very inexpensively. So that's really driving, I think, the increased outsourcing of the payments process.
Great. You touched on a lot of sort of return on investment metrics there a little bit. Jonathan, for you, going through this modernization effort that you did, what were some of the key benefits, or that return of time, the return of building relationships better, and just return of the investment that you made in a system like Tapaldi? Can you tell us sort of how you measured the success of that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our key measurement was that we never had to build out pretty much a finance team at all, but never had to build out an accounts payable team. So throughout the past 6 years, we've never ever had to add anyone to accounts payable, because the whole system for us has always been automated, except for the first early few months when I did it myself. And so not only do you have the cost savings from all the headcounts, but for me in particular, the biggest one was to not have the management burden by having another team, right? Within my org, I had essentially 90 people across all operations, finance, and HR, and to not have an additional 3 or 4 or 5 people within an entire department, entire team, means that there's one less thing you don't have to worry about, just from a management perspective. And then, other benefits from kind of like the scaling perspective is that, moving towards an automated system allowed us to really rethink how retail could work in general. So I mentioned that, we essentially are no longer constrained by when or how we want to pay our vendors. And so nowadays, we move to a business or a model where we can essentially sell goods on demand, and we can just pay them on a 10, 30, 50-day lag, and be able to track all the payments for all the goods. So we're fairly agnostic in how we sell goods and how we order goods now. We work with, I think last year, about 4,000 vendors, and we sent over 20,000 payments. And every year, the amount of payments we've sent is actually kind of more or less doubling or growing very rapidly. But the business can't really tell, because we're just trying to make it easier for our vendors to work with us and get paid faster and have flexibility in how they can work with us and sell their goods. And so I think that's been really interesting, and something that wouldn't be possible to just keep doubling how many payments you issue without really changing your fee structure, because we don't have to have the headcount to support it.
And Ed, for you, I mean, you've built your firm now with a set of value propositions that you can go to market with. And that, to me, kind of is the value that you're delivering is kind of this ROI question of payments automation. So give us kind of how you are positioning the ROI of payments automation.
Payments is a part of an ecosystem of tasks that I do. It's an important one because it's ultimately that money talks, right? So vendors want to see their cash. And so if, as I said before, you do everything really well up until payment, it's like being at a restaurant and you've had a great meal, but you're actually ready to leave and they won't bring you your check, and you're like, why can't I just get out of here? I've had this great experience, and you're left with this bad taste in your mouth. So, as it were. It's similar to payments. It finishes off what is otherwise a tasks that we do on an outsourced basis for any company that creates, that uses creators to create stuff, right? And there's the agreement that you have to enter into. There's the delivery of the material. There's the sale of it and licensing of it. And then there's the payment for it, the obligations. And the obligations, when you're in my business, there's permission, there's what you can't do, prohibitions, and then there's the obligations. And the obligations are generally pay. Sometimes it's other obligations, but in this context, it's pay. And if you don't get that right, all the other stuff gets diluted, and your clients aren't thrilled with your work. So from my point of view, I think we're the only company in the United States that's doing this kind of end-to-end service for vendors who are supplying content to media and entertainment companies or to advertisers. And this has been a core component of that service offering.
All right.